push that to talk. Okay. I'd like to call the regular meeting of this school board to order. It's Monday, February 21st, 2022 at approximately 5:15 p.m. I'd like to note that board members Dan Tweeten and Melissa Gleason are joining by phone. I'd like to also recognize everyone in our audience and thank you for joining us this evening. Please stand and join me to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Diane, could you read the school board norms, please?
The board developed norms are to share and respect varied opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, to prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan, to exhibit a mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparation for meetings and a commitment to board education, to commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for the staff, students, and community of Jamestown.
Thank you, Diane. Any public communication? No public communication. Does the board have any conflicts of interest to declare this evening? No conflicts of interest. Let's move on to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Dan, second by Gail. Any discussion or any items you'd like to remove from the consent agenda for further discussion? No discussion? There's been a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on to our regular meeting. We have recognition this evening. This is my favorite part about our board meetings. The first is the Cyber Madness State Championships. Gail, would you read both of our, and then we have the North Dakota Choral Director of the Year. Would you read both of those?
Certainly. Congratulations to the JVCTC team of Carl Ames, Jordan Dooley, Mason Clucky, and Colin Kropp for winning the inaugural Cyber Madness State event out of a total of 12 North Dakota teams. This activity has been established to provide fun, educational, and skill-building experiences for high school students to bring awareness to the needs and interesting careers available in cybersecurity. Congratulations.
Jordan, can I put you on the spot just to tell us a little bit about the event? You can just step up to that mic there.
Hi, can everybody hear me? So for our competition, we got to go to Bismarck State College, and we got to compete in this big conference room with a whole bunch of other teams from around the state. And we are all given 4 challenges throughout 2 days. Each challenge got more difficult and was worth more scoring-wise. And the first 3 were more of a knowledge-based test where we had general questions about cybersecurity and networking. And the fourth and final challenge was my favorite, where we got our hands on a real-life firewall, and they sent a whole bunch of malware and viruses through it. And then we were asked questions on the specifics of the virus, like what was the file name, what's the difference between a client exploit and a server exploit, things like that. And even though during the competition we started off pretty mid-ranged, we got 3rd and 5th in the first 2 competitions. In the 3rd round, we really came back and took 1st at last minute. with 3 minutes left, we were in 7th place. And then when the timer struck 0, we were in 1st. And then we kept our position in the 4th round, securing the victory. So.
And you guys really pulled away in the last round.
Yeah, we were really far behind. We weren't even on the leaderboard in the last 10 minutes. And then just out of nowhere, we came up to 1st.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The North Dakota chapter of the American Choral Directors Association honor a Jamestown musician at their state conference in Bismarck. Cheryl McIntyre, Jamestown High School choir director, was selected as the North Dakota Choral Director of the Year for outstanding work with her JHS students, leadership in ACDA, and activities in music throughout the state.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Gail, for reading those. Any correspondence? If the board is okay with this, right before the superintendent's report, I'd like to move agenda item 2A up under Buildings and Grounds. 2A is review of bids and approval of guarantee maximum price, GMP number 2. Consolidated Construction is connected with us, and as long as we have the connection, I think we should go ahead with that if the board is okay with that. Okay. Sally, do you want to, or who is going to start this off? Okay. And we have Consolidated Construction connected here.
Very good. Can everybody hear me?
I think you might have turned your mic on, Sally.
All right. Thanks everybody for having us, and we're sorry we're unable to appear in person today. I was actually going to have Cassidy and Jordan attend the meeting, and I would like to introduce. I'm not sure if you've met Cassidy or not. Cassidy is kind of the head of our business development group here in North Dakota, and she handles a lot of our messaging and communication stuff as well with our school clients. And then Jordan Nusma, the other young man on the calendar there, fresh back from Jamaica, I just wanted to introduce him to the group tonight. He is going to be the project manager, and he'll be working with Rob and the facilities committee and the school board, as will I, throughout this project. But you'll be seeing a little bit more of Jordan moving on, and I just wanted to introduce him to the board this evening. So Jordan had played a big hand with the bid package for the Jamestown High School project, with receiving the bids, finishing the estimate, and some of the cost management, and he'll be kind of phasing in to this Jamestown High School project should you choose to move forward with it tonight. So with that, the board packet, does everybody have their board packets in front of them to reference? It's going to be a little hard to share documents tonight.
Yep, Mike, everybody should have that. I'll try this way. Mike, everybody should have those documents.
Okay, all right. So I'd just like to start with the bid tabulation, and I think in the interest of time tonight, if you would like me to run through them line by line, I could, but I think I'd just like to offer an executive summary. Overall, 47 bids were received for the project. We had about 20 bid packages, a couple of which were combined, such as plumbing and HVAC, but we received 47 bids for those packages, just slightly below an average of 3 bid per category, which with our market right now and the type of project that it was, I was actually pleased with. Of those packages, I think about 10 or 11 of them are actual subcontractor bids, and 5 of those packages are awarded to Jamestown, or would be awarded to Jamestown contractors. Sherbinsky was the apparent successful bidder for site work and excavation. Lux Concrete was the apparent low bidder for site and building concrete. Hillerud Construction would do a combination package of the miscellaneous general carpentry and then the metal stud framing and drywall package, which actually syncs very well with the work he's doing for us for erecting the metal building. There's some firewalls and some things that kind of mesh the two of those phases together against the real building, and it's a real advantage to the project and to the school to have those that firm doing all that work together. That'll make a real seamless transition there. And then the last, Scott's Electric in Jamestown is the apparent successful bidder for electrical. Any questions on the bid tabulations? Hearing none, I think we'll move into the executive summary. And thanks, Rob. I saw your message. That's perfect. So the executive summary, those of you on the facilities committee, as well as the board in general, would probably recognize this document. Back in January, about the middle of January, when we finalized some of the estimates and cost management procedures for the middle school, that was the column on the left, and dated January 13th. And that basically what we're doing is we're just kind of combining the 3 projects that we're considering under this project scenario. The high school athletic addition, first and foremost, the Gusner HVAC replacement, and we're budgeting a little over 2.3 million for that. And then the middle school, gymnasium project. The column on the right now would have the numbers for the Jamestown High School project updated. So that would be the number on the top at about 1,056,000. And this is the what I would, I guess, call the project recommendation that the building committee felt should go to the board tonight. The executive summary level of the project costs there, we've got about 65,000 for site work, which is primarily excavation and grading work, a little bit of demolition, site demolition back there, not very much. And then the general construction costs, so think concrete, flooring, finishes, metal studs and drywall, caulking and windows and doors, those types of things. Came in at about $702,000, and this is all based on the bid results. Our mechanical costs were considerably higher than budgeted, about 197. That includes fire sprinkler and primarily HVAC. And I'll get into that bid difference here in a little bit. And then the electrical costs actually came in much better than budgeted, with Scott's at about 72,900. Now, there is one alternate that Rob, that we would like the board to consider, and that was for the sports flooring in that weight room area of about $78,993. That was an alternate bid, primarily because we hadn't really discussed it from a budgeting standpoint in the past. And then we performed some what we call cost management, and because the bids did come in over budget, and we went back and looked at a few things that were a little curious with some of the bid results. One of the main items, and there is a document if you'd like to, it'd be the next page in your packet. There were basically 3 items there that we felt as a building committee with Rob and his team and ourselves and the architect that would be advantageous to the project. The first one, something snuck into the specs there about sealing all the contraction or control joints in the floor with sealant. That's something that's typically not done except for very, very specialized flooring systems or high water tables. And That was not needed. There was a cost savings of $6,800 for that. The second item that we looked at was there were some what I would call double walls that were designed into the project. What the architect was trying to do on the west wall against the pool and the north wall of the corridor was just try and box in those columns, which is something that really isn't needed. And the columns have the proper slope, so they're not going to be headbangers or anything like that. We felt the savings of roughly $24,000 there would be worthwhile to the project. And then the last item kind of explains why the mechanical costs came in higher than we expected. Energy Tech Services, they've got an existing contract with the school district. There's a little bit of a misunderstanding with the controls system. Controls are essentially what tells your mechanical system whether to heat or whether to cool and whether the pumps should turn on or turn off. And they tie energy recovery units and all those things together into your mechanical system. And they basically, their base bid was considerably higher than what we would have ever budgeted for the project. And the reason why is you've got some controllers in your facility that are still available. They are slated for discontinuation, some years in the future. And they misunderstood the spec, and they were essentially going to build a new network into the school, the Jamestown High School, to handle the control for just the small part of the project. And it really isn't needed or advised at this point in time. And so the deduct of just under $30,000 there actually gets us back to the original intent of the plans and specifications to how this, building addition should function, mechanically from a control standpoint. And it's basically the exact system that you've got there now. So based on that, back to that executive summary, one page prior, we've got that cost management savings in there of about $60,319, which ties our, which adds up to the top, which would be a construction cost of $1,056,152. And which is about 100,000 over what the budget was before. But keep in mind, there's about 79,000 there of that gym floor or that flooring product in the locker rooms. Running down the list, Gusner is still budgeted the same. That's out for bid right now. Jordan, I think we've got a pre-bid meeting this week there to run subs through the school. And bids are due on that March 8th, I think, next week, March 8th. And we'll, work through a similar process on that with Rob and the building committee and you eventually with the board on that. And then the middle school project also just literally hit the streets here over the weekend. I think all the plans were available to the subcontractors first thing Monday morning here. And that project bids are due, subcontractor bids are due there March 17th. With some construction contingency, and again, that's spread throughout all three of those projects. We're looking at about $6,788,000 for projected project costs right now, with the Jamestown High School costs now being known and firm, and totaling down to about $7.3 million in total project costs right now. As we speak, we'd be receiving bids and updating numbers with Gusner in the middle school as we move forward here in the process. Are there, I just went through a bunch. Are there any questions for me at this point?
Aaron?
Can we hold it just a second? I want to make sure that they're going to be able to hear. So Quentin, do you
I'm
want
going
us
to
to?
unmute. I'm unmuted. Okay, go ahead, Aaron, excuse.
Okay, can you hear me?
Well, we might have to relay the question. but-
Okay. The only thing is with the knowledge that we gained from the bids on the high school, does he have any predictions on the remainder for the middle school and Gusner in terms of, do we expect to see a growth in those areas, or are we going to be fairly accurate with what we have laid in?
So Mike, the question is related to what kind of, what kind of forecast? Okay, okay.
Heard it. Thank you. I actually heard that very well. That's a great question. It's kind of interesting. The Associated General Contractors of America put out some documents here just a couple weeks ago, and over the past year, we've seen about a 20% inflationary jump in construction costs. And when I say 20%, those are inputs. So think of things like concrete and studs and electrical supplies and things like that are coming in. Interestingly enough, contractor bids have only increased about 12.5%. So they're still kind of catching up, according to that. As far as your projects are concerned, mechanical's been a tough one. I'm going to be honest. That one's we've kind of been chasing that one around with some other projects here. And of course, Gusner is a project heavy with mechanical. I was a bit enthused that things like concrete and, some of the site work and some of the, flooring and ceilings and things like that came in pretty close. We do have some ceiling work and some miscellaneous finish work in Gusner, but it's primarily mechanical. Fire sprinkler actually came in under budget on your job too, which is encouraging to me because we are putting a fire sprinkler system in at Gusner. But other than that, I don't really know what to predict there. All three of these projects are very much different in scope from one of the others. And, we're just going to have to
Okay,
see how they
try
come
this
in.
again.
And I'd also,
Years.
okay. I'd also like to comment, we had several local contractors that gave us some very good bids, which is going to make this project possible. So we also very much appreciate our local contractors, putting in bids and coming in with bids that will be able to make this possible, so low enough. Is there other questions? And Dr. Leck?
If I could make a comment too, draw your attention back to something that Mike had talked about with the approved alternates. And just draw your attention to the approved alternate of the flooring and then the cost management. What we are attempting to do here is we were adding the alternate with flooring, as you go through construction. We separated those as a cost control mechanism because we wanted to see what flooring would come in at and give us a chance to see, can we use what currently exists in another space and move that. I don't think that's going to be possible. Unfortunately, even if we had wanted to simply move that existing flooring, I don't think that would be a possibility for us. So not putting a flooring in or not making a commitment to flooring would mean that would happen on concrete or there would be some other expense there. Usually in a space like this, if you're going to get this close to a finished, we wanted to provide that cost management to close that gap as much as we could and to make that as close to the actual bid costs or the original project costs as we could. And I want to also state, one of the other comments that Mike made related to the control upgrades. We had a good conversation about this with Consolidated Construction, and they didn't feel like if we delayed that upgrade, it was going to cost us any more. That there's essentially going to be just sometimes when you enhance your system, it's cheaper to do it now, and you're just delaying a greater cost later. And based on Consolidated Construction, they feel like that's going to be close to negligible savings if we do that, if we just plan for that at a later date or when we need to, when we can't find controls moving forward. So that made me feel comfortable with just moving on with our existing controls and not upgrade to that. And that was a pretty significant cost of that, part of that cost management. I think Mike said it was 35. I'd have to look at the documents again. but a pretty significant cost. And like I said, we're really trying to manage decrease as much as we can the cost of that alternate flooring through those other cost management tools. So questions, did I create more questions than answers?
Aaron, go ahead.
So the information that you put in front of us here has the budgetary items in the bids. Was there any items, issues or risks that you had seen within the bids as far as the schedule is concerned?
No, not in terms of schedule. I think that appears to be consistent with and online with what our plans were, and that's outlined in the GMP as well. That hasn't changed.
Are there other questions or discussion points?
I mean, we're still dealing with construction. We always have some concern over delays and things like that, but nothing that has pushed that is an obvious derailer. Yeah, we'll see.
Yes, weather, yeah, so weather is unpredictable. Any other discussion or questions from the board? Okay, so we moved item 2A up before reports. Yep. And so I'm looking for a motion to review of bids and approval of guaranteed maximum price GMP number 2. Is there a motion? Gail, motion to approve? Is there a second? Second by Aaron. Is there any further discussion now that we have a motion to approve? Okay, so we have a motion to review bids and approval of guaranteed maximum price GMP number 2. Can I have a roll call, Sally? You're managing
Okay.
multiple units there.
Melissa Gleason. Can you hear? Yeah. Yes, okay. Diane Hansen?
Yes.
Heidi Larson?
Yes.
Jason Rohr?
Yes.
Gail Nelson? Yes. Dan Tweeten?
Yes.
Aaron Roberts? Yes. Okay, motion passes. 7-0 with 2 absent.
Motion is approved. And thank you to Consolidated Construction to be able to come online with us so we can get this information regardless of the weather. So thank you very much. Okay, moving on. We're going to move back up under reports. Superintendent's report. Dr. Leck.
All right, thank you. Just let me get back to my report.
Thanks, Mike, Cassidy, and Jordan.
So my written report is provided as it has been. We start with our health and safety updates. You can see the most recent, at least what I had at the time of publishing this was 214. And as we talked about last time we met, a pretty significant decrease, and that crest has continued. We're on the downslide of that crest. Actually, the impact I did numbers today were under 10. So that's good news for us as a district as we continue to move on from that crest. We sent out some messaging related to, we've agreed to be a distribution site for COVID testing. So if members of the public, if they're watching this and want to have testing, it does not mean that, I think we need a,
Sally, maybe turn your mic off.
It's my, I am muted.
you got it, okay. Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so we sent out messaging to the public related to COVID impact or COVID testing, and we agreed to be a distribution site for free tests. So we have 2 different types of tests, one for students or children that are 2 years and older, and then we have those that are for 14 years and older. So if people want those tests at home, it doesn't matter if they are students or connected to the school in any way, they can stop by central office and get up to 2 tests for family members. So, depending on how many, or I'm sorry, a test for every member of the household. And it's okay to stop in and get multiple tests. If you go through and test on Wednesday and you need some more next Tuesday, that's fine. And we received an allocation. We can get more from the state through Central Valley. And so we're not concerned about running out. although we may be out for a certain period of time depending on the interest. But we'll continue to be that resource for the community as long as those tests are available. So we're happy to be able to do that. We talked last time also about some communications. You may have seen quite a slew of communications related to substitute teachers and transportation. In the last couple of weeks, things snowballed for us pretty quickly. You know, we reached out on Facebook. That turned into news, radio interview, turned into Jamestown Sun, turned into WDAY interview as well. So we got a lot of coverage there. We had about, I think, 5 or 6 communications from community members willing to substitute teach, and we had and we gained an activity route driver. So even a little bit can help. So we're certainly always looking for more, but we're happy to get a little bit of assistance as well. I've just shared more for your awareness. You know, we're continuing to push out awareness related to employee assistance program. We're really trying to get more of our staff to recognize the value of the employee assistance program, what's available to them. And so we're sending out those blasts a couple times a month related to different aspects of the employee assistance plan. So again, I just gave you an example. One other piece of that I think is important is what our administrators are aware of and what and how they can support at the building level. Sometimes, you know, it's great to have something coming from the district, but it doesn't, you know, what happens at the building level is going to trump what happens at the district level. So I just provided some information from you. The Village Family Services came and presented to us. That presentation is available, a summary, and then a video if you want more information related to what the EAP provides. But this is the training we had completed for our administrators so they can support this initiative as well to get more awareness around our EAP. Thank you to the opportunity to provide professional learning for me. I attended the national conference last week. It was in Nashville. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't that much nicer than it was here in Jamestown, but it was a great opportunity to attend the national conference, and I appreciate that. Just to make you aware, the district doesn't hold the cost for that at this time. In my role as the governing board, the state association, the national association pay my registration and my travel to do that, but you do give me leave. And so I appreciate the opportunity to attend that. A lot of really good sessions that really came away with 2 in particular that I felt were appropriate to what's happening in our district, and also I think just give you good ideas about how things could work. Probably the most prevalent from those is culture. I went to a few different sessions on culture. I got a good session. If you're ever at a national conference of school boards and EAB presents, I've never attended a bad session from EAB. I can't think off the top of my head what EAB stands for, but it is a research firm, and they collect a lot of different research along school topics. They are not a vendor. Sometimes when you attend a session and it becomes like a sales pitch, and they are not that, and I've really enjoyed. But EAB did a great session on school culture. I did attend a few different ones, and they gave some feedback on how to be a little bit more prescriptive around what culture means and how to empower staff to be a part of those decisions rather than simple teacher appreciation gifts or things like that, you know, being a little bit more prescriptive. So as I looked at that presentation, I thought about our Teacher Leadership Academy, which is something else I'll be getting into a little bit in my report, and how we can utilize a Teacher Leadership Academy to do more in-depth research around what that culture means and empower staff to be a part of what that might look like in the buildings. And that might vary from building to building, but at a district level. And so I really enjoyed that. I thought it gave really excellent advice. Another takeaway, and this is maybe a bigger topic, but how we can improve an opportunity to improve our access to support staff. And I had some thoughts and having some conversations with other superintendents related to how we can improve our teacher training programs in the University of Jamestown or Valley City State University, and how we can leverage those and also with our support staff. But that's something maybe for another day. But there's something that really good that I think came from that as well. Teacher Leadership Academy, we've talked before about needing a rural partner. Had great conversations with Lemoore Public Schools, and they haven't formally committed to be that partner yet, but they have 4 or 5 members. So I think that's going to be enough for us to continue on. I've had some conversations with 3 other staff members in Jamestown. We have 8 now. I've had conversations with 3 other, and hopefully we can get to that 13 to 15 mark where I think I can move the needle with the university. I know they want 15, but I think if we can get 13, that would be close enough. At least I'm hopeful. And if not, we'll continue. Maybe we even have to seek out another rural partner to make sure that we have this program in place. But I think there's really good things. We're very close to that. I referenced the cyber madness in our facility projects, which we've already talked about. And then I included in your board report a memo from October of 2020. Every time at this time of the year when we do open enrollments and tuition agreements, it gets to be a lot of questions come up about what does that mean and what are those agreements and why do we do it this time and why do we have so many at a certain time? And so I just provided that refresher on tuition agreements and open enrollments from a couple years ago. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Dr. Lack? I guess go ahead, Jason. You were thinking. With the test kits, so we have ones for ages 2 and under, and then
2 and up.
2 and up,
Yep.
ages 2 and up. Okay. So, and they don't have to be affiliated with the school district.
Correct.
To get it. We want these picked up when people are asymptomatic, correct? If they're symptomatic, how does that work?
Well, the reality is that oftentimes, in a perfect world, yes, we would rather have people have a store of think ahead, but the reality is sometimes people feel like they need them when they're symptomatic. But I would say plan ahead.
Okay.
And have them, have them on hand before you need them is probably the rule of thumb.
Okay. Or maybe call ahead too, just to get some information or where to pick them up and so forth, so.
Yeah, so central office, people call and visit with Jane. Jane has been organizing that for us. And so talk with Jane at central office and she can get those set up for you.
Yep, all right, thank you. And any other questions? Jason, go ahead.
Regarding the TLA, so should we not, it's not a one and done type thing. Let's say we'd have to take a cycle off or whatever. I guess I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that we're struggling to find participants. I think we'd be hard pressed in the district to find any teacher that wants to add more to their plate. And I think that's just the reality of this. And I just want to make sure that people know, or staff know, that let's say we aren't able to hold one now, that it's still an option down the road.
Absolutely, great question. The idea is that, and one of the reasons why we wanted to go with the rural partner concept, not just because we feel like we need to be a regional hub and support our region as a whole, and recognize that some smaller schools can't do something like this without a larger partner, but we want it to be a perpetual program, something that we can offer multiple cycles to, and hopefully this is cohort 2, which leads to cohort 3, which leads to cohort 4, and it would be available in perpetuity in our district. You're right, it's not always going to be the right time for everybody, and we want to make sure that it's available for our staff all of the time. So if we were to take a cycle off, say we didn't have, and it seems unlikely now, but if we did take a cycle off, it's 3 years, because we have to partner with the University of Jamestown. And so we have to work within their cycle of when they're offering. They would support for 5 semesters, think of it as a 3-year plan. 5 semesters on, 5 semesters off. 5 semesters with the TLA, they use that same staff then for 5 semesters of their online program. So, they're working with the TLA programs to manage this. And so that's why they keep it on the same cycle. So it wouldn't be a year, it would be 3 years, but it would still be available to people. But yeah, that's really how that works.
Gail?
I guess continuing that, what would happen if a teacher started that program and then, due to circumstances, had to move out of the district? Is there something in place for them to continue, or are they just, how does that necessarily work? If that might be keeping some people, if they were worried a husband gets transferred or a wife gets transferred.
So there's two questions embedded there. The first is, this is supported by a the Rural Development Grant through the Bergam Foundation. So if a staff opts to take that funding, which pays for half of the tuition, they sign an MOU, and that's a Bergam Foundation requirement, not a Jamestown Public Schools requirement. But they sign an MOU that says, well, this is a rural development grant. They want to build capacity in teacher leadership in rural areas. So they don't want, teacher A to receive a degree and then leave for an urban area. So they ask you to sign an MOU that has a prorated payback. So there's that piece of the situation. But I will say your original question is, what happens if somebody takes on a different role, and it's just part of life, right? We don't plan necessarily what happens 3 years from now. Sometimes life happens. And so I can speak to what we did in the past. We had a participant. It was not one of the Jamestown participants. It was one of the Edgeley participants, but left in mid-program. And we just offered that virtually for the last, I should say, at the end of the process. And we kept her in virtually through the last semester. But she did have that rural development grant to pay back, that funding to pay back, because she was no longer in that, in that district. But she was still able to complete her degree.
Good question. Any other questions for Dr. Luck regarding a superintendent report?
Can I make one more comment, just a voice of appreciation for the University of Jamestown. Really provided a great program with a lot of flexibility for us to offer this again. But talk about making it affordable. They provided no fees, no student fees to our students, which they would have been 100% responsible for in our old program. And a cost per credit of $325, when you cut that in half, that's about as affordable as it's going to be. And, and getting one other comment I wanted to make with Jason's good question too about cycles, we also have to remember we have a high percentage of teachers that have their master's degree already. So our pool to draw from is quite a bit smaller than it might be in other districts, because we have so many teachers that already achieved a master's degree. So there's just not as big of a pool to draw from. So that rural partner is even more important.
Thank you, Dr. Luck. If no other questions, we'll be moving on. Letter D, Board Education. The Board of Education has been rescheduled due to weather. Moving on to E, Old Business. There's nothing under Old Business. F, New Business. Number 1, Activities. There's nothing under Activities. Number 2, Building and Grounds. We've already approved the review of bids and approval of guarantee maximum price GMP number 2. And do we have to formalize that?
No, I can talk about that real quickly.
Okay,
The
number 1.
GMP is based on what you've already approved.
Okay.
So it's the same verbiage. Moving forward, we'll have that as part of the agenda, simply like this, rather than adding it.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Number 3, Curriculum, Assessment, Instruction. There's nothing under that. Number 4, Finance. Approval of non-teaching professional salaries for the 2022 to 2023 school year. We're going to have some discussion on that. Can I have a motion to approve first? Somebody.
I'd move to approve non-teaching professional salaries for 2022, 2023 school year.
Is there a second? Second by Aaron. 3, discussion. Dr. Luck or Aaron?
I think Mr. Hout put Aaron in charge of this.
Yeah, so yeah, we got together and discussed, what we wanted to put in front of the board here, and just the 1.3% increase is basically in line with what we've done historically, in lining up with the negotiated agreement with the teachers. So we thought that was applicable for moving forward with this group of individuals.
Any further discussion? Jason?
And just to clarify, there are no new positions here. They're just current positions, correct?
Correct.
Any other discussion? We have a motion to approve non-teaching professional salaries for the 2022 to 2023 school year. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. 4B, approval of support staff wage schedule. I'm looking for a motion to approve. Gail's motion to approve. Is there a second? Second by Diane. Discussion? Aaron, you want to take this one as well?
Yeah, so this one here was actually consumed most of the discussion. We looked at several different options ranging from 50 cents an hour increase all the way to $1 an hour increase. And then it's presented in the format here for the agenda. But the thought process that went behind the recommendation for the $1 an hour increase was that just recognizing the difficult to fill positions here, and that we had to start making an adjustment in this area so that we can, well, one, it's the right thing to do, and getting these folks some higher percentage increases from what we've done with some of the other groups. So that was the mindset behind it, and that we needed to start making some improvements in this for the district.
Yep, Dr. Leck. Thank you, Aaron.
And just point one thing out too, for those that are not on the schedule, and it does state it in there, but if support staff off the schedule, $1.25. Okay, so $1 given on the wage schedule, and then $1.25 if they are off the wage schedule. And just remember, these are people getting their lane. It's $1 based on the whole schedule. So it's essentially the base amount is increased by $1, then you get your lane change. So, I guess I'm not sure, Sally, what ranges there. I know you guys talked about that in your meeting, but just, I guess I wanted to make the point that it's $1.25 if they're off the wage schedule.
So 96 cents to $1.16 is how it works in the scale. And then like Rob mentioned, for those people having 11 years' experience or more, $1.25 an hour. Excuse me.
Any other questions or discussion points? Jason?
Another point of clarification, and then anybody who falls within this category of employment is eligible for benefits, correct?
If the position is 30 hours or more, we might have a couple cashiers that are, food service workers that are only working 2 hours. But, summer staff.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Aaron?
Yeah, just one other point too, just for the summer, the summer workers there, it went up from, was it $10 to $12?
$10.50 to $12. That's your summer help, mowing, maintenance help, and also activity workers, those people taking gates and collecting money there.
Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second for approval of support staff wage schedule. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Approval, letter C, is approval of central office salaries for the 2022-2023 school year. I'm looking for a motion to approve. Motion by Aaron, second by Diane. Any discussion? Aaron, did you want to add something first? Jason, is that all right if we, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just again, the basis for the recommendation here, again, was just to be consistent with what we've done historically and then align with the teacher negotiated contract, so. Percentage.
Thank you, Aaron. Jason, go ahead.
Just a little bit confused on the curriculum professional development position. Percent time, 50%, and the number of days, 204. That just didn't make sense to me. So is he actually working 102 days?
Full days, it's
102?
it's equivalent, yeah.
Okay. So what's on there is correct. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a clerical error or Okay, it just seemed odd when it said 50% and then 204 days.
Maximum of 800 hours by TFFR guidelines, so.
All right. Any other questions or discussion points? Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval of central office salaries for the 2022-2023 school year. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to D, approval of superintendent contract for the 2022-2023 school year. Can I have a motion for approval? Aaron approves. Second? Is there a second? Second by Diane. Any discussion? Aaron?
So again, this one, actually, we went back and forth a few times on this one, and decided that, or the recommendation to, again, align with the teacher's negotiated percentage, and then doing this as a one-year contract, so we can give ourselves some flexibility in out years as opposed to trying to do that percentage on multiple years. So that was the thought process there. There was a question that came up as far as vacation leave and how we want to handle that. And, you know, as far as any amount of carryover or anything like that, and that we talked through that in the decision, or that we wanted to just recommend that we maintain what we have right now, and then making sure that we look at that as a part of the overall contract stream for everybody, so that we're consistent on all the individuals in the district. So.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Any other discussion or questions? Okay. We have a motion and second for approval of superintendent contract for the 2022-2023 school year. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. E, general fund balance. That's just informational. Sally, any comments?
Yeah, unless anybody has questions.
Any questions from the board? Okay. Monthly financial reports, letter F. Can I have a motion to approve? Gail, is there a second? Second by Diane. Any questions for Sally on the, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question within the building fund. There's some expenses there that are exceeding the plan. And I just want to make sure we have some visibility to that in terms of, you know, we can expect some sort of budget change request to come in the future on that. And is that my understanding correct on that?
Yeah, in the budget, the GLG contract was approved, and so rather than bring a budget revision right away, and because I'm not sure how much will be done in this fiscal year, so to bring it at the time when the budget process can be more exact.
So there's a timing aspect with this in terms of this fiscal year versus next fiscal year,
Yes.
and how everything rolls together, and because the fiscal year ends in June 30th, yeah.
Can I make a comment to that? They have an amortization schedule that they provided to costs, that they've kind of plotted out costs. So we'll look to that, so it isn't all paid out necessarily in one fiscal year.
Right.
And just the idea behind that was just to do one towards the end of this fiscal year.
I imagine our snow removal costs might be a little high this year as well. They're not too
That's a
bad.
fixed cost now.
It's a fixed cost. Good. Benefit to us. Especially on a day like today. Any other questions, Aaron? Are you raising your hand?
I was, but no.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or discussions? Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the monthly financial reports. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to personnel. Approval of an extended contract for the second semester for Michael Dietz, Art and Physical Education at Blue Jay Academy in the amount of $5,701.88. Motion by Diane, second by Jason. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Superintendent evaluation timeline is there for informational. And so if you have, Amy, do we have everyone's in, or everyone has? Very good. Thank you, everyone, for getting your information in. If you have questions on that, that'll be an agenda item at the next meeting. Number 6, policy and procedures. Review of inclement weather guidelines and protocols. This is for information. Dr. Luck, do you have any comments on this?
I do. I provided a board memo. I need to stop doing this presentation because every time I do it, we have bad weather, which,
So this is
well,
your fault.
I guess the odds of that this summer or this year are probably pretty good. But I did want to maybe just touch on a little bit of, and allow for some questions related to inclement weather and how we make that decision. I wanted to provide some historical context. And again, I won't read this necessarily, but just reference perhaps a few things. You know, for those of us that went to school in the 80s and 90s, school inclement weather was a little different. Each of our governors treated it a little bit differently. It wasn't unusual when I was in school, for example. I think you know you're getting old when you say when I was in school. But when I was in school, it was a little bit different. It wasn't unusual for the governor to forgive a day. Then it became common practice. If you took 2, you get your 3rd one for free. And that shifted in the late 90s, early 2000s. And now Governor Burgum has been reticent to make that change and has stated he will not do forgiveness, at least not on a common basis. I'm sure that he would if it were necessary. But that precipitated a change. What we saw from educational leaders that have the responsibility to call for inclement weather is there was a disincentive, or what I've called a disincentive, to have storm days. We were looking at, oh, those storm days are coming, and geez, we don't want to take one in October, in that October snowstorm, because then we've only got one left all the way through to the end of the year. And what was happening for most schools, like Jamestown, we had extended schedules. And there's a requirement for, prior to 2019, there was a requirement to how long your school day needed to be considered a school day. And then there was also a second requirement in statute that said you have to have 175 contact days. And so that really was pretty limiting on what we could do with storm days. Because if you didn't make, it was hour for hour makeup. So every late start, that was a makeup. Now, schools like Jamestown that had extended schedules, we were allowed what was called a grace day. And what that meant was, you couldn't bank time, but you could make it up in small increments and half-hour increments after the fact. So because you had a longer than what was a required day, 5.5 hours in the elementary, 6 hours at secondary. So if you had a 6 and a 6.5 hour day, and you had a inclement weather event on, say, January 5th, you couldn't go back and look at all that bank time that you had, but in half-hour increments every day after that until you made up your 6.5 hours, you could count that. You could do that once. So you basically had a one-day, forgiven day, kind of built into these extended schedules. So a number of us talked to legislators in 2019 and suggested a change, and that was days to hours. So we moved away from that 175 day system to an hour system. And so really you can track the intent of our legislators pretty easily by looking at the required hours. They took 175 days times the elementary requirement, and that got you to 962.5 hours per year for elementary. You did the same thing at the secondary, and you got to 1,050 hours. See, like I said, it's pretty obvious what the intent from our legislators was. And so now, I will say, though, what was very clear, not stated statutorily, but very clear in intent, is the legislators wanted to provide us flexibility to be able to make these decisions and not worry about storm days, but they also didn't want to hamstring us. But their intent was very clear, that they wanted schools to continue to provide those 175 days that were contracted, that were provided in contracts to staff. That was very clear, and they stated that multiple times. I testified. I think Mr. Hout testified on this as well, on the days to hour legislation. You know, we were asked that question, our school's going to suddenly decide, no, we want to have fewer days. And we stated, well, no. The intent may be, if you remember back to last year, we had fewer student contact days because we were in the middle of a pandemic. We felt our staff needed more time. We needed more professional development time. The legislature was clear in stating that's okay. If you have fewer student contact days but replace them with contracted staff development time, that's allowed. That's the intent. That's okay. Think of those 175 days as contracted days. Now, I will say I don't think that it's the intent of the law to say simply replace 13 student contact days with professional development days every year. But there may be years in which a school board says, you know, we need 5 additional days, or we need 3 additional days, or we need a day every month because we're really hitting this big initiative hard and we want to be able to provide staff time. You know, and the idea behind that, of course, is you provide professional learning to staff, improves teaching, which improves product outcomes for kids. So, I mean, that's the philosophy behind it. I do think it's important to note that, you know, we educate in Jamestown about 50 years. Now, this is including our PLC time. We're about 50 hours more per year at the elementary and 91 hours more per year at the secondary level within those hours that were required. So I think of them as the minimum of what schools must be doing. And we far exceed that, and we have as a school district for many, many years. But that's kind of the primer for the historical context of where we are. And I think that's important to understand when we make inclement weather decisions and the impact of those. And I'll talk about the carryover of the grace day too. But prior to the closure, the delay, release, you know, whatever decision we're going to make, because we know we really have 3 decisions to make. We're going to have school as planned in an inclement weather. We're going to have a partial day, either a start late or we're going to leave early. Or we're going to have to close school. And so we know that those are the 3 choices that we have to decide upon. But there's a process that's pretty time intensive before we ever make that decision. So we have to understand what those state requirements are. And we have to recognize, too, that there's a balance between providing safety for our kids and the custodial responsibility that a school is going to have in your community. Because if we don't have school or we start late, there's an impact to childcare, there's an impact to the business force, there's safety concerns with students getting to school, there's safety concerns with staff getting to school. There's a hard balance sometimes between when we make those decisions, and it's not always easy. I can tell you that I've never met a superintendent that says, I love making weather-related decisions. They're not easy, and they're oftentimes different. Where people fall on the side of what decision is made depends on where you live. And we have to make the decision that makes the most sense for the district, knowing that there's not going to always be universal support for what we do. For example, the best decision may be in certain times to not run rural bus routes. Well, that's a significant impact to the people that live in the rural that depend on those busing, but you have to make a decision that's the best decision for the district. Sometimes you're running rural bus routes late for 2 hours, and again, same idea. You do the best that you can, and you balance that safety to custodial responsibility. But prior to that, I mean, I can just run a list of things that we do. You know, we're calling meteorologists. The National Weather Service knows most superintendents because we call them and ask about tracks of storms. We use a lot of different websites. The NOAA is the one that I think is the best, has an hourly breakdown. At least in my experiences, I found it to be the most accurate. But that could be calling other superintendents, highway patrol, road crews. You do a lot of calling just to make sure that you have a good assessment of what the conditions are like. And then ultimately you have to throw it all together and make that decision, understanding the safety aspects and the custodial responsibilities and, you know, the legislative impacts. And again, that's a lot more flexible now than it used to be. And we're certainly thankful for that change. We try to make that decision either by 9 o'clock the preceding night or by 6 o'clock. And people say, boy, I really don't like to get that 6 a.m. phone call, and I totally get it. I don't like to be up at 3:30 either. But the reason we have to make that decision by 6 o'clock or prior to 6 o'clock, really, we notice it out at 6, is our rural bus drivers are going out on the roads by about 5:40. So we have to make that decision so we know. And push it, if we go 2 hours late in our rural buses, that's just pushing that 2 hours late. So again, we need to make that decision then if something changes after that late start, because we do that and we buy ourselves some time sometimes. And I know that we've heard that before, that, boy, I wish you would have just called it. Well, sometimes we do 2 hours late so we can buy some time. And so we can see, is it going to be better with light? When we have daylight, is it better for our staff that are traveling? Is it better for our bus drivers when they're transporting kids? And so that's kind of our cutoff. We look at 9 o'clock at night because most people haven't gone to bed yet, and then 6 a.m. And we do that because of our rural bus drivers and our staff that have to travel. Like I said, we make 3 decisions, whether we have school as planned, if we have a partial day of some sort, or we close school. We always operate, though, with what we call parent prerogative. If at any time a parent feels, boy, this isn't the right choice for me, we mark them as absent. They're absent because they aren't here, but they aren't. It isn't an unexcused absence. It's a family absence. And somebody says, boy, it's not safe for me to come to school. That's okay. That's okay for people to choose that the route to school is not safe for them today. But we always operate under that. And I keep coming back to the ripple effect that happens when we make the decision in school. We're one of the largest employers, of course, but we have 2,100 kids that come to school, which means that we have a lot of households that are impacted by the decisions we make. And so if people can't come to school, we don't want our youngest of students at home while mom and dad are working. And so we know that doesn't happen. We know that a lot of children have to stay home with their families, so that impact to our workforce is pretty considerable. And we have to consider those factors. It's certainly not as important as keeping kids safe, but it is a factor that we have to consider. We rely a lot on our bus contractor, Dietz, to run a lot of their rural routes. They give us a ton of feedback on how routes are like north, south, east, and west, what roads are good. They do a great job of contacting people, and if our families know that they need to contact Dietz to get that specific information, but we always run rural routes when we can, and at least to the degree that we can. Sometimes they're late, but we really try not to run rural. We want to run rural buses. We try not to cancel rural routes because that becomes an equity issue, and we don't like that. There's years like this, and I can think of one other school year I've been a superintendent where it's felt like this year, where the wind is blowing constantly and it stays cold after we get a really light snow. And light snow is great to drive through. It's not so great to blow around. And that creates different issues for us. But I've been through a year like this, where it seems like every week we're making some decision that impacts our rural students. And that's frustrating for all of us. But again, we balance those decisions the best that we can. So I referenced earlier how do we make up, and we have had that grace day in the past where we kind of got one freebie. We could bank up all that time. Well, historically that existed, and what most school districts, and Jamestown does this too, we've continued the concept of that grace day. We do it once. So what we've enacted is our first storm event, we don't make up. That's a day that we've opted not to make up because it's similar to that grace day that existed when we had these really rigid 175 days. So we've continued to do that. For this year, we looked at the calendar a little differently. If you remember, we looked at a day off of school, and we opted to take that day off of school, and we said we won't take a grace day. So our next 2 inclement weather days were days of school. So in a traditional year, take a grace day, day 1 of inclement weather. Days 2 and 3 are our storm days, and those are built into our calendar. After day 3, and then we start looking, if we run into 4 or 5, then we have to look at what other options do we have. And that's when I think the legislature really provided us a great flexible tool. So schools can decide, Do we want to make up that day? Maybe there's an opportunity we can make up the day. That's what we do here. We have school for kids. And so we want to prioritize those days. But when it becomes inclement weather and unsafe, the legislature's provided us that flexibility. That's where we can dip into those extra 50 hours, that extra 91 hours, and make safer decisions for kids. Because think about it, when you're a teacher in a classroom and you only have 70% of your kids, 65% of your kids in class that day, how productive educationally is that day? So those are things that we need to think about. But that's how we operate. Day one is a grace day. 2 and 3 are storm days that are scheduled, so we make up those days. 4 and beyond, then we start looking at flexible options that we may have. So the other question comes with virtual learning and what happens. You know, we hear that some schools are going into virtual learning. I think that's a great option for those districts at some point. I don't believe that we are ready yet. I don't think capacity-wise we're ready yet. We are one-to-one in terms of our technology, but that doesn't mean that every kid has that device at home. I also struggle with our teachers being prepared for virtual learning in a way that's educationally viable and not busy work. Essentially, how I would see this playing out right now with the capacity we have right now is we would be asking our students the day before an event, make sure that you bring your technology home, and then we're asking teachers to, on the fly, create their whole lesson for the next day. And until we're embedded more in a learning management system, and that's a natural transition for teachers, we're just asking them to do extra work on those days, and we're putting a real burden on our staff at that time. I just don't feel that we're ready yet. I think it's a great option for some districts. I just don't see that as an option for us yet. The other thing I'll bring up with snow days and how that's impacted the state, especially with the transition of days to hours. Sometimes we hear that, well, such and such school isn't making this day up, or they've gone to virtual. We have to understand that we're a different animal than every other district, and for the most part, districts do it somewhat differently. Like I know I was talking with superintendents south of us, and they actually build 5 storm days into their schedule. And if at the end of the year they don't take those storm days, they just end their school year early. Well, somebody might hear, well, I've heard that Lemoore or Cullum didn't make up that day. Well, they have 5 storm days built into their calendar. That's a different situation than what we're doing. But what I fear is that people hear, well, these days to hours. Well, we don't have to make that time up. Well, that's not what's happening. I think the vast, vast majority of schools across the state, if not all, well, I know it's not all, but a high percentage of staff of schools are doing exactly what we're doing. And making up days, building storm days into calendars and making up those days and working towards 175 student contact days. Even when we hear that rumor mill going around that, oh, such and such a school isn't doing that, they might be going into virtual learning, they might be not making it up because they have additional storm days, they might be in a grace day like we are. So just caution about that. But with that, I would stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Dr. Leck? Gail?
Not a question, but I would just never want that role of a superintendent, and I'll never, ever question a decision they make, as it isn't a decision that's easy. In all my years as being a student educator, never once would I ever want to input or criticize a decision made.
You want it tomorrow?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm out. But, you know, I don't envy them. Yeah, it's a very hard decision to make. And I do remember days where it was never called back in the 70s, and honestly being in school with 5 people. And literally one time, my father was an educator, and there were about 10 teachers that could make it. And it's not a fun thing. It's never fun.
Maybe
So
just a comment to that.
I thank you for what you do and all those things that go into it.
Thank you. Just maybe another piece of history that I didn't share earlier. There was a Senate Ed chair, and this was back when I was first a superintendent. Actually, before I was a superintendent, but he was still a legislator at the time. And what I get concerned about with flexibility is abuse, because there was abuse that happened in this particular legislator's district. And the result of that abuse was a very rigid set of rules that required 175 contact days and hour for hour, and it took us 2.5, 3 decades to get beyond that and change that law back to a little more flexible where school districts can make that decision and you can prioritize safety in a better way. And so I just don't want us to see, I don't want to see us as a state abuse this flexibility and you know, the pendulum swings from extremes to extremes. And I would be fearful that we would go back to a rigid system that we don't like.
Jason?
Thank you for the explanation. Just one more point of clarification. I understand the 1-day grace, and then on day 4, we start having to think of other options. The jump I'm not making mentally is we have 50 days, or 50 hours, sorry. Are those not considered student contact hours? I mean, I agree, we preserve those student contact hours, that's paramount. But are those not considered student contact hours?
No, they are. They're considered student contact hours. But it basically shows how many hours higher than a typical 175-day calendar we have. We go to school longer. We go to school half an hour longer than what is required, what is the minimum standard. But like I said, the legislature was very clear about wanting to go to school 175 contracted days. They were really clear because that's what they pay for. But those are, I mean, that's 50 additional instructional hours. That's accurate.
So then my follow-up question would be, I'm struggling still to understand, you know, we're asking kids to be in school, staff to be in school. It seems like we're not taking advantage of that time then if we're requiring them to make up a storm day. Maybe philosophically I'm wrong. I'm just not making that connection of we're putting in the time, we're having our staff put in the time, and then we're not utilizing that time should we need to.
So I think what a legislator who passed the law would say, that's 175 student contact days. Their focus is the 175 student contact days. They give us flexibility beyond that minimum amount, and that's what I would call the 962 and a half and the 1,050. That's minimum. I don't know anybody that wants our educational system to be at the minimum. You know, we want to be a little bit beyond that anyway, but they were very clear that from a contract standpoint, it should be 175 contact days, because that's what they pay for. And so yes, is there flexibility that's allowed down to that minimum? Yes. But our schedule really isn't any different than it was 5 years ago, when we had a slightly longer schedule, but we had to maintain 175 contact days. We're just given more flexibility in how we account for that time. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. It may be just as a philosophical difference, but you know, that's the flexibility that we have. Could we not make up those days by the letter of the law? Probably yes. I think the law would change very quickly if that's what schools opted to do, because that wasn't the intent. We were given that flexibility with the understanding that those parameters would stay in place.
So should this winter continue in perpetuity, those hours are still an option, should we really run into the need?
Absolutely. Oh, that's absolutely on the table. That if we continue to have inclement weather, and I will say that the other thing that flexible hours does provide us is when, in the past, and I kind of got around this, but when we had late starts or early dismissals, we had to make up hour for hour. Now we simply absorb those. That is one thing that we do absorb, because we're still going a day. It's just not a 6.5 hour day. We might be going 4 hours or 4.5 hours, but that allows us to prioritize safety and still have that student contact day. But we aren't required to make up hour for hour like we were. The old system, for example, think of the grace day. you could use that as a full day, or you could use that as 3 late starts. And so now we just absorb those late starts, so that's what we would continue to do. And we haven't accounted for those late start hours or early dismissal hours. We just absorb those in what we have. So a part of what you're talking about.
Any other questions, discussion points? All right, thank you, Dr. Leck. Predicting travel conditions and driving conditions is never easy. And we also appreciate our Dietrich bus drivers that travel out in those conditions and give us feedback as well. Moving on, we are at number 5B, approval of policy DBBA, amended drug and alcohol testing program for employees. Is there a motion? Gail, motion to approve. Is there a second? Second. Aaron, second. Is there any discussion? Okay. We've had a motion and a second to approve the policy DBBA, amended drug and alcohol testing program for employees. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on for approval, letter C, approval of amended suspension and expulsion policy, FFK. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Gail. Is there a second? Second by Diane. There's any discussion? Aaron?
I'd like to put a motion in place to amend the original motion to include, well, I'll state the motion here, to modify the language in the highlighted section to a student that violates the district's weapons policy and/or student alcohol and other drug use abuse policy may be expelled for up to 12 months. That's the motion. The rationale behind that is because I'd like to put some tools in the toolbox for the administrators to deal not only with the weapons policy violation, but also with the drug use and abuse violation.
Dr. Leck?
Maybe 2 things. One, I think any change you might want to consider having legal prior to a motion, if you want us to look into policy change, rather than changing it at the table. You may be advised, or I would advise, to first have a draft that goes to legal review. The second, from an expulsion standpoint, expulsion is only allowed for the remainder of the school year. It's not allowed for a calendar year. The only exception to that is federal law requires a calendar year for weapons violations, and that's why it's stated that way in suspension and expulsion policy, FFK. But you're not allowed to do that. It would only be for the duration of the school year. So if that happens on May 1st, you have an expulsion hearing, that is through the end of the school year. It isn't allowed by law beyond that.
There's been a motion to amend the policy. Now we need a second for that, right? So we need a second for that. Is there a second on that? Is there a second? There being no
I'll second.
Seconded by Jason, okay. So we have a motion and a second to amend the current policy presented to include drug and what was alcohol? Is that what you would?
We would need to know that, yeah.
Student alcohol and other drug use would be added to the highlighted section. Yes, Jason, is there a discussion? Yes.
Is the alcohol and drug use addressed in other board policy? I'm assuming so.
Yeah.
And number 2, is this revision or clarification closely tied to what the School Board Association would currently propose?
Yeah, it is, and it's exactly, having gone through expulsions, it's a very prescribed process legally. And I couldn't recommend to deviate much from the school board developed policy for that reason. I think that would present some challenges legally that I would think that you'd want to work through if you wanted to make any change to this particular policy that you look into first before providing a draft.
Gail, go ahead.
I would have concerns looking at it too from an addiction point of view and what kind of help we would be looking to get a student in that case. Sure, that might be a great violation, but I don't know if it would warrant expulsion. I would really hope it would warrant treatment, or if we would look at something like that, just having worked at a high school as a counselor and looking at addiction issues and some of those issues around it. Most kids with some of those things are truly just kids in need of treatment for help. I think they're almost two different issues. And I would like to see us really study outcomes with that because, I mean, and unless it were a dealing issue or, you know, it's a whole multifaceted look at things. So I would have some concerns.
Are you suggesting maybe with some board education for future agenda items?
Definitely board education on the area of addiction and prevalence in high school and how it's treated and what kind of procedures we have in place and how we look at helping students who come back after treatment and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Dr. Leck.
Well, just a comment too, it does state in the highlighted area the reasons you can expel. Now, again, it's for the remainder of the year. You know, you can expel for a few reasons. Insubordination, which I think we know is not following the rules, which would be a violation of the handbook, you know, drug or alcohol violations on campus, things of that nature. Habitual indolence, which has actually never been tested in court as to what habitual indolence actually, you know, what are the criteria to meet to be habitually indolent. And so most don't go into the habitual indolence when you go into an expulsion. It normally falls under insubordination or potentially disorderly conduct. Those would be the two that would operate typically in an expulsion. And again, the weapons violation is different because that's federal law that governs that.
Any other discussion? Aaron?
Yeah, I guess the intent behind the suggestion there was just to, you know, open up the toolbox for the administrators to deal with some of the more, some of the serious conditions in the case that comes up. I'm concerned that with the policies that we have in place, we kind of limit what we can do in some instances, and so that, again, that was the intent behind it. And I do appreciate the comments from Dr. Leck that, yeah, we should probably have legal review before we make these types of changes to it. So I'd probably vote against my own motion based on that. So, but I do appreciate I just want to kind of open up a little dialogue and then just to kind of get it out there. So.
Gail, go ahead.
Just my understanding is suspension is already in their toolbox with issues that arise on that. It just depends upon length of expense and some other factors.
I would say that's...
I would think that is already in the toolbox and used.
Suspension certainly is, and I think the question comes, if I'm understanding the intent of the question, it's does there need to be a greater tool if that is not the right tool, you know, if there needs to be something strong. And I would suggest that expulsion is already allowed in those cases because you're allowing disorderly conduct expulsion. It does exist for insubordination, which means a violation of the handbook or a violation of a student administrator or staff directive, and disorderly conduct. You know, if you're looking at a violation of that type, that certainly could fit in there if it were warranted, if evidence supported that. And I do feel it's important that we recognize too that we have a school resource officer that is a pretty integral part of a lot of violations that occur. Officer Renfro is involved in a lot of these types of situations and provides great guidance to us, and the police department do charge out, and we support charges when that's appropriate. And they're a great resource and asset for us. If we didn't, I would likely have advocated long before this that we need one. And I think if you talk to Officer Gross, is it Captain Gross now? But he would say, boy, as a district, you might not have enough. You maybe should have two, one that serves elementary and one that serves secondary. So.
Yes, we appreciate that partnership with the city of Jamestown for that school resource officer in our schools. So is there any other discussion on the amended motion? Now, making sure I'm doing my Robert's rules correctly, we vote on the amended motion first?
Correct.
Okay, so we are now voting on the amended motion to add the drug and alcohol language to the highlighted portion of the policy that was presented in your drive. Sally, you want to do a roll call?
Melissa Gleason? I don't think she's, Diane Hansen?
Yep.
No.
Heidi Larson?
No.
Jason Rohr?
No.
Gail Nelson? Dan Tweeten? Aaron Roberts?
No.
Motion fails.
So the amended motion has failed. Now we're going to move back to the original motion, which we had a motion and a second, to approve the amended suspension and expulsion policy, FFK. Is there any discussion on the original policy as listed? Any discussion? Any questions? Okay. Sally, let's do a roll call on this one as well. So
Diane
Yes.
Hansen? Oh, did you want to say
Yep,
something?
yep, go ahead.
Heidi Larson?
Yes.
Jason Rohr?
Yes.
Gail Nelson? Yes. Dan Tweeten? Aaron Roberts?
Yes.
And Melissa Gleason, but I think.
Yes,
Oh.
okay, we got her, yes.
Whoa!
Okay, so we've,
Motion passes.
yes, we've had approval to pass the approval of amended suspension and expulsion policy, FFK. Moving on to letter D. Now, there's going two parts to this. Approval of amended suspension and expulsion regulations, FFK-BR, including review of a suggested procedure for, is that correct? For conducting an expulsion hearing, FFK-AR1. And number 2, review of suspension and expulsion of special education students, FFK-AR2. Did you want some discussion before?
Well, I just wanted to comment on this. The biggest change to this is we have to treat special education students different. That's IDEA, it's federal law. And so what the School Boards Association did is revise the expulsion of special education students protocols to account for the steps that need to be taken beyond what's required for all students. So we have a procedure in place for all students. There's a few steps prior to that need to occur, like a manifestation determination for a special education student. So they've just added protocols, made it more clear for all how it impacts all students, because you have to treat students differently in expulsion. So.
Is there a motion to approve letter D and subsequent 1 and 2? Gail? Approval by Diane. Any discussion? Jason? Oh, no, you're just, okay. Any other discussion or questions? Okay. There's been a motion and second for approval of amended suspension and expulsion regulations, FFK-BR, as well as review of suggested procedure for conducting an expulsion hearing, FFK-AR1, and number 2, review of suspension and expulsion of special education students, FFK-AR2. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on, number 7, tuition, nothing under tuition. 8, other. There's some information for election timeline as well as it's on our website, and if anyone has questions, they can contact central office. And Sally, did you want to comment?
Just,
Your same information?
obviously the information, Heidi Larson, Jason Rohr, Dan Tweeten, Melissa Gleason, and Greg Allen are the members that are up for election. The election is held June 14th, and as Mrs. Larson mentioned, the information is on the website and also can be picked up from Jane at the central office. The deadline is April 11th at 4 p.m. to get those applications to the business, to myself. And then if you so choose, you can, there's a name placement ballot on Wednesday, the 13th. If no one comes, we just put staff in the central office in that spot to make the drawing.
Thank you, Sally, for that information. Moving on, items for future agenda. With our discussion here, suggested we maybe have this, the school resource officer come and give us some information. Any other items for future agendas? Jason?
Just one thing, and I'll bring it up again when we address Dr. Leck's evaluation. The timing of that seems to be off to me, and there might be some deadlines, per state statute. It just seems odd to me that we're going over Dr. Leck's review after we've approved his contract. I'm not sure if there's a way within that time frame that in the years if it's not a 3-year agreement or whatever, if we can set that timeline up just so that we have a review done before the contract. It just seems to make more sense to me.
It is in statute, and I think we just had a review in November, correct? So depending on what timing you're talking about, I mean, is it before, after, or after, before? So, yeah, so certainly we can adjust that time, but like I said, we just had the review in November, and this committee met post that, so. Yep. Any other items for future agendas? Okay. If you think of something, contact myself or Dr. Leck. Meetings to be scheduled. District School Improvement Committee meeting is on Thursday, March 3rd at 3:30 p.m. in this room in the Thompson Room at the middle school. School board meeting scheduled on March 7th at 5:15 in this room in the Thompson Room, the middle school. Health Insurance Committee meeting Monday, March 14th at 3:45 p.m. in the multipurpose room in the middle school. And I'm going to add that the SEC is meeting virtually on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, the 23rd of February at 11:30 a.m. And there's should be information on their website for that. Any other meetings to be scheduled that we missed? Okay. Click on your monthly superintendent evaluation, section 1, goals and vision setting, and section 6, operations and resource management. There being no further business, the meeting is adjourned.